All right, let's dive into something that's frankly a huge deal for any team using AI agents: customization. You get this incredibly powerful general-purpose AI, but how do you make it an actual, useful member of your team with your specific needs? Okay, let's get into it.
So your AI agent can whip up code, it can analyze data, it can draft docs. I mean, it's definitely smart, no question. But is it wise? Wise in the ways of your team? Does it really get your specific processes, your unwritten rules, all that tribal knowledge you've built up?
And that's the heart of the problem, isn't it? Out of the box, it has no clue that you guys never ever hard-code API keys, or that your release process has a super important manual check right before you go live. This is what we call the specialization gap, and we need to close it.
Well, the good news is we can teach it. We can take this brilliant generalist and turn it into a specialist that really feels like an extension of your team. And today we're going to look at 3 core ways to do exactly that: rules, workflows, and skills.
First up, let's talk about rules. Honestly, the best way to think about them is as the fundamental guardrails for your AI. They set those non-negotiable boundaries of what it can and can't do.
So what does that actually mean? Well, rules are always on. They're just working passively in the background. They're constantly being injected into the AI's context to make sure it's following your core principles, whether it's working on a Python script or a simple text file. You'd use a rule to enforce things that are universal, the things that just don't change, like your team's coding style guide, or those critical safety nets like don't you dare commit secrets. They can even enforce bigger architectural ideas, like making sure new code includes proper error checking. These are your always and never commands.
And this slide? It's a perfect example. This simple little file acts as a permanent instruction. Anytime the agent is working on this kind of project, this rule is active, stopping it from making a really common but really critical security mistake. It's simple, it's powerful, and it's totally automatic.
Okay, let's move on to our next tool and see how this all builds up. Let's talk about workflows. Now, if rules are those passive guardrails, then workflows are your active, on-demand macros for getting repetitive stuff done.
The key thing to get here is that workflows are not automatic. A person, you, has to explicitly kick them off with a slash command, something like /test or /deploy. They're designed to run through a predefined list of steps, just like a macro you might run in a spreadsheet.
So when would you build a workflow? Think about those times where you just groan because you have to go through the same 5 or 10 steps again. That feeling? That's your cue. It could be your standard code review checklist, your testing pipeline, or a tricky deployment that has to happen in a very specific order.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. This workflow takes a tedious, super error-prone task and just turns it into a single command. So instead of you manually trying to figure out what code changed and which doc to update, you just type /update design docs and boom, the agent just goes through this precise checklist, nothing gets missed.
And finally, that brings us to our third and most dynamic tool: skills. I want you to think of these as your on-call specialists. They are entire packages of deep expertise that the agent can pull in when it hits a really complex domain-specific problem. This is where the magic of skills comes in. See, unlike rules, they aren't always loaded into the AI's brain. The agent has this kind of menu of skills it knows about, and it only loads the full instructions for one when it figures out that your request needs that specific expertise. It's a concept called progressive disclosure, and it's key to keeping the AI fast and focused.
You'll want to build a skill when you need to package up some really complex knowledge. We're talking about things like how to run a security audit on your specific tech stack, or how to use your company's own internal deployment tools, or how to correctly talk to one of your internal APIs.
This example really shows that a skill is so much more than just instructions. It's a whole package. You've got the markdown file with the high-level strategy, including crucial steps like, hey, ask the user before you do something irreversible like flashing hardware. But you've also got executable scripts to handle all the nitty-gritty technical details. It's knowledge and execution all bundled up.
Okay, so we've seen the 3 tools on their own. Now let's put them side by side. This is where you really start to see how they're different and, maybe more importantly, how they can work together.
This table just nails it. To really get the difference, just look at that first row. Activation. Rules are automatic, workflows need an explicit command from you, and skills, they're activated by the agent itself when it understands what you're trying to do. That simple distinction right there is pretty much the whole story. Rules are your invisible guardrails, workflows are command line macros, and skills are the conversational experts.
and they aren't meant to be used separately. You can build some incredibly powerful stuff by combining them. For example, you could have a rule that says for any firmware release, you must use the firmware release skill. Or maybe a release workflow that, as one of its steps, calls on that same skill to do the heavy lifting. This is how you build really robust, intelligent systems.
So, the million-dollar question. Which tools should you use for whatever problem you're trying to solve? Let's walk through a super simple framework to make that decision a piece of cake.
Just start here. First, ask yourself, is this a principle that should always, no exceptions, be followed? If the answer is yes, that's a rule. Easy. If not, ask the next question. Is this something a person will deliberately ask for with a command? If yes, you want a workflow. And if it's neither of those, but it's some deep, specialized knowledge that the agent should pull in when needed, that, my friends, is a perfect job for a skill.
And here's your cheat sheet, the simplest way to remember the difference. Rules are your always do this, never do that statements. Those are your guardrails. Workflows are your run my specific process commands. Those are your macros. And skills are the agent understanding, I need to release firmware safely. That's your specialist expertise.
So let's just tie this all together. At the very foundation, you've got rules, and they set the boundaries of what's okay. Layered on top of that, you have workflows to make all your repetitive manual processes consistent. And finally, you've got skills ready to jump in and provide that deep specialist knowledge right when it's needed most.
By combining these three things thoughtfully, you really move beyond just having a clever tool. You start to build a true AI teammate, a specialist that actually understands and is encoded with your team's unique standards, processes, and all that hard-won tribal knowledge.
Look, this isn't just theory. It's a practical toolkit, and it really leaves us with a fun question to think about for our own teams. What tedious process, what critical piece of knowledge, what safety guardrail will you automate first to build your own specialist AI?